My name is William Harris. I'm a product manager here at Classy, and the team that I focus on is our payments team, essentially the movement of funds from donors to supporters. And I have one of the esteemed privilege of really working on our donation pages themselves and really getting to study how people give on them and hopefully increasing conversions across our platform for all of our nonprofits. The talk today is about the donor journey and what the donor journey means to me and how people give on donation forms, how they bring their personal preferences to those donation forms. So we're going to talk a little bit about actually how habits form as people, how we bring those habits to our online giving experiences, and to how we use our mobile phones and how we use PCs. And then we're going to take that all the way through to how we create conversations with donors around impact and bringing them into your mission. So if we think about the brain, the human brain, we can think about it sort of like an onion. The further down into the bottom that you go, the older it is evolutionarily. And there are essentially two major parts of the brain. There is the base, which is called the basal ganglia. And what that is that's like the natural fight or flight part of our brain. It's subconscious, unconscious thinking. It's where if you put your hand on a hot pan and it starts to burn you, you pull your hand away really instantly. It's how you blink, it's how you breathe. It's this part of the brain that is the oldest. We call it the lizard brain. What's really interesting about this part of the brain is that's where habits form. On the other side, the external parts of the brain, that's where conscious thinking happens. When you're painting or when you're being creative, when you're learning something for the first time, the outside of your brain is actually the part that's being used the most. And that's the part that makes us human. That's the part where emotion comes into play. It typically takes about 14 seconds for someone to make a decision. And so as you can imagine, when you put your hand on a pan, you don't want to use the outside of your brain, right? You want to pull your hand away as soon as possible so you don't burn yourself. That's why we have these two different parts of our brain. What's really interesting about forming habits, however, is how these two parts of the brain talk to each other. So one second. So in the 1990s, they did an experiment in MIT where they put little scanners inside of the brains of mice, and they put them into a maze. And the first time they studied the brain chemistry and what was going on for these mice, and the first time they got into the mazes, the outsides of the brains were firing like crazy. They were like figuring out where they were. There's tons of activity was going on. They seemed lost, but then they found the cheese at the end of the maze. And the more times those mice started to go through that same maze, the less the outside of their brain started to fire, the more the basal ganglia started to fire, to the point where they didn't have to think anymore. They knew exactly where to turn, exactly how to get to the end of that maze, and to find the cheese. And so what's really interesting about that, and the reason we're talking about that, is that we all have formed habits over our lifetimes, especially because we're going on almost 15, 20 years of making payments on the internet. So we all, every time we go to sit down at an e-commerce store and pull out our credit cards and to pay, we have these deeply ingrained habits that we're so used to doing. And anytime there's a disruption to those habits, we get frustrated, right? Like, man, I gotta fill out this crazy long form and put on all this information. Why? I can't stand that. And so if you're interested in like the first part of this, which is about habits and how successful products use habits, I really do recommend these two books. The first is a New York Times bestseller, really interesting book called The Power of Habit. And the second one is really focused on products and how the best products out there leverage how we as people form habits and create habits out of their use. And so the basis of any real habit is a cue, a routine, and a reward. And essentially what that is a cue is the trigger that makes us want to actually go through that habit. The routine is the behavior itself that we're going to go under. And the reward is quite literally the thing in your brain saying, I got to do that thing again because I really liked it. So if we break it down with like chocolate, the cue is I'm kind of hungry. I want a little something sweet. The routine is eating the chocolate, and the reward is, man, that was really, really delicious. I want to eat that again. And if you look at me, I love chocolate. And so in the 1920s, a man named Charles Hopkins, he did a really interesting marketing campaign with Pepsodent, the toothpaste. And he realized, sorry? Oh, speaker's not working? Sounds like one of the speakers over here isn't working. Okay, is that better? No? 1 second. Was it not working the whole time, or just recently? It just went out? Okay. Check, check. Chickadee check, check. No. Okay. So I think what I'll do is I'll try to just project over here, and then hopefully you guys can all continue to hear me with the speaker. So like I was saying, a man named Claude Hopkins in the 1920s, he was a major marketing executive, and at the time, almost zero Americans brushed their teeth habitually. Something that people didn't do. It wasn't a habit that we did as a people. But he realized that if he created a habit, that he could get people to actually buy Pepsodent toothpaste. So what he did was called the Pepsodent habit wheel. He realized that he needed to figure out a way to get people to think that they needed to brush their teeth. And so he started creating advertisements like, feel that film on your teeth, run your tongue across your teeth, feel that film. That's the film, which is natural. It's not, it's nothing to do with this. That's the film that makes your teeth yellow. You need to have that bright white smile. And so what he figured out was that when people started to do this, that was the cue. That was the trigger that formed the habit. The routine was brushing the teeth, and the reward was a bright white smile that equated to beauty. And a decade after Pepsodent's advertisements started coming out, 50% of Americans brush their teeth more than once a day. Now we're about a century later, about 97% of Americans brush their teeth regular. I'm sure everyone here probably owns a toothbrush, right? Which is incredible. So as you can imagine, I want to take this a step further and think about nonprofits. The best and most successful nonprofits create these kind of habits. I'm a card-carrying member of the ACLU, right? I'm a monthly giver to that organization because I support their mission and I connect with their mission. Cue, what is the cue? The cue is whatever grabs their attention. It can be a Facebook post. It can be a video that goes viral like Invisible Children's Coney 2012. It can be essentially a lot of different creative things. Classy, our campaign pages, our fundraising pages are that cue. That cue is my friend is asking me to give. I want to crowdfund for a well. I want to help build a school in Nepal. The routine is the checkout itself. And that's really where my team focuses the most, is on the routine. Like I said, we all bring our buying habits to the table every time that we give and every time that we pull our credit cards out of our pockets. And speed is incredibly important. And the reason speed is so important is because habits, like we said, they're quick. They form in the basal ganglia of our brain. It takes 2 seconds for us to pull our hand away from that hot pan. We want things to be quick in this part of our brain. And so, when you're checking out and your grandma calls, or you get that Facebook post, or whatever notification pops up on your phone, we're distracted. So my goal and my job is to try to make checkout as fast as possible to get people through the experience. So just by numbers, this is incredibly important when we talk about mobile giving, because the trend is 100% towards people moving to m-commerce. In 2020, it's expected that over $600 million will be spent on mobile devices. But what's so fascinating is that in retail, even though people are looking at items 60% of the time, like actually perusing through items on their mobile phones, they're only buying those items 15% of the time on mobile devices versus 85% of buying these things on PCs, which is really fascinating. So the trend is that people are going to buy more and more on mobile devices and on the go, but they're actually buying the most right now on PCs. And so we have to think about the habits and the routines of people when they're on their phones and try to optimize for that experience. So here's an example of a study of how you can optimize that experience on a mobile phone. So there was a study between Macy's and Home Depot where you take the zip code and you put it in front of city and state. And via the person typing in their zip code, it automatically fills in the city and the state. Well, when that happens, and you actually do that, right, it took somebody, it was 72% preferred that was the route that they wanted. 72% of people preferred those fields to be automatically filled out for them. And it took them 7.8 seconds compared to 21 seconds to fill in city and state. That's 93% faster. And this seems like a minor thing, right? Like we all are so used to typing in our zip code and our country and our state. But these kind of preferences are subconsciously there. We feel them even though we may not be aware of them. And so these are the kind of increases and inputs that we're trying to work on I'll take questions at the end. Yeah, these are the kind of inputs and fields that we try to optimize on Classy. So here are some examples of for-profit companies that I think do this incredibly well. Well, obviously Amazon does a really great job about this. They were the first to do Amazon one-click payments. And the reason that they have been so successful is they take the routine completely out of it, right? They say, you save your credit card on Amazon, you have your shipping saved and all your preferences there. With one click of a button, you can have that tide show up the next day, right? And so they've essentially optimized routine to the highest extent. And then Apple's doing something really interesting in the mobile space. They know that it's very difficult to pay on mobile phones. They feel the pain, right, that we all feel. And so with Apple Pay, what they're really focusing on is how they can allow people to check out with as few touches as possible. And with your mobile wallet now on most websites, you can pay by just putting your thumbprint on the device. Samsung has an equivalent, and mobile wallets are obviously a growing market. And so these are two different examples of optimizing for both PC and mobile for wherever the donor is coming from, or wherever the buyer is coming from. So just a quick question, show of hands. Off the top of your head, how many of you know your bank account and your routing number right now? 1, 2, okay, interesting. About 2 of a couple hundred, maybe. I don't know if 100 people are here, but okay. Now in contrast, again, show of hands, how many of you know your username and password to your bank? Okay, so if you wanted someone to pay you from your bank, obviously the way to get them to pay you, right, the least friction is to get them to pay you by logging into their bank, because you all know it, right? So that's pretty much what we're doing at Classy. We're working on an ACH payment solution that allows people to use their bank's own security and log in directly to their bank to make donations on the Classy platform to any of our organizations. So what's really interesting is they did a study where they took that first option, put your account number and your routing number and use that to pay, or log in with your username and password to your bank itself. 92% of users chose to pay with their username and password. 92%, that's staggering. And what's even more incredible is that the studies that have been done on this checkout flow are really, really great for conversion. They had 73,000 people go through the flow, and the flow is really simple. You search for your bank. 1,600 banks are on this system. I use Chase, or in this case, the example is Charles Schwab. You click your bank, you are taken to a page that is directly the security of your bank. You log in directly to your bank. Any security questions that your bank has for you, they have you fill out. Any text messages that they might send you with a security code, all that's handled automatically. And then all the way through to your funding sources where you get to choose if I want to pay with my, my checking or my savings account. And what was so interesting is 75% of people made it from here to here, and 75% of people made it to that third step, which is a really incredible conversion rate. So again, how are we bringing this all back to Classy, and sort of where does this all come back? Is that we are by default shortening our donation forms. But what I want to really say is that that is for optimal conversion, but that doesn't mean that that is what's best for your organization. So I was talking to an organization the other day, and they were telling me how we have to collect the billing address on our donation form. The reason being, it was actually made a lot of sense, was that 90% of their fundraising is via direct mail. So it's critical to their business. So you have to kind of balance these things out. If it's critical to your business that after every donation, someone picks up the phone and calls your donor, then ask for your phone number. You know, the conversion rates aren't gonna vary too much by asking more information. But again, buyers beware, right? Routine. You know, you don't want to overburden people with information that they have to fill out before they get to the end of their donation form. It's somewhat common sense, but I think that's important to note. So back to this, we are using as few fields as possible by default. We are working to build as many payment methods as possible so that the preferences of your donors, when they come to our forms, always have what they prefer to buy in. And then obviously leveraging how people pay mobile and on PC first. Yep, we talked about this. And the final piece is reward. And I actually think reward is the most interesting part of this equation. When you have a Netflix account, which I love Netflix, or an Amazon Prime account, there's an expectation of what you get out of that relationship with Netflix. I expect that there's gonna be enough TV shows and movies to keep me satisfied until the next time they put on more movies and TV shows. And you know what? If for any reason I don't like the programming, I can cancel my, my business relationship between Netflix and myself. And you know, I hate drawing conclusions between for-profit and non-profit, but I think in a lot of ways that is a very true thing that we all have to think about. Is when people are giving to your organization, they are forming a relationship with you. What's interesting is naturally when someone hits give, serotonin releases in our brains when we see those big buttons, and the reward is that feeling. It's that good feeling that I'm doing something right. And it's natural. It actually happens in our brains every time you click big buttons to buy things or to donate. So that reward is there. But the question is that reward enough to bring them back to the front of the queue, to go through that routine, back to have that feeling again? And that's what I really want to challenge you all to really think about, is rewards don't have to cost anything. I mean, I can give you some great examples of orgs that have done physical rewards, right? Barbells for Boobs has a really awesome reward for when you fundraise, right? That is a tangible thing. I've also seen orgs send weekly emails of validating quotes to make you feel good. I've seen orgs record videos that thank their donors from their executive director on YouTube. I've seen all sorts of rewards that make you feel like you're part of something bigger than you. And I think that's why people give at the end of the day, is that giving a donation is participation. It's a conversation. It's an experience with an organization. So I challenge all of you to really think of rewards that way. To think of rewards as that trigger that forces someone to create a habit. And I think that's about it. You know, we really try to foster storytelling. If you were at the last talk, Matt did a really great talk with To Write Love on Her Arms. And they really focus on storytelling. And I think with impact tracking and with the way that you can talk about impact, you can create rewards that are free. With your donation of $100, you helped build that well. The sooner you can let that donor know the reward, the sooner you can get them involved in what you're doing, and the sooner they can see how their funds have gone to do something, the more likely it is that they will start to create that habit loop. Cool. Any questions? Yep.
Hey, I was wondering if there's any difference between one-time donations and monthly donations on the donation form. With all the data and the research that you have, does it apply directly over to monthly giving as well? Is that pretty much the same?
Yeah, well, on our platform, people are more likely to give one-time donations. I think the most recent number was about in a single month, about 90% of donations are one-time versus 10% are recurring. But if you look at that over a year, right, recurring donations happen every single month. So if you look at it over a year's time, 80% of donations are one-time and 20% are recurring. But I think recurring is really interesting because it's a relationship, right? A recurring donation is someone who's invested in your cause, and sending them a thank you note one time when they first make that donation, thanks for that donation that's going to happen for the next year, that's it. You know, after 8 months of giving, where's my reward? Like, my habit is I want to be invested in you, right? And so the best things to do for recurring are to foster those relationships, right? So foster that habit, continue to keep them involved. Any more?
I know with the Classy platform, you automatically send a thank you and a receipt after you give your first donation, but is there any consideration or an option to program like an automatic reward email sent, say, 7 to 10 days post donation that says, hey, also thank you again for your $100 donation for the well? Because that saves a lot of time on the back end administratively. Does that exist, or is that maybe something you could consider programming?
Definitely. You know, it's hard for us to create automation around triggered emails like that because it's so specific to your organization. But we've seen organizations leverage other systems like HubSpot and Salesforce to send a lot of these automations around their messaging. So they know to trigger emails via Salesforce Cloud to send out an email after those donations come in exactly on that time frame that you're talking about. I've also seen some examples of organizations actually trigger rewards via our APIs. And engineers for Barbells for Boobs is a great example. I showed you their sweatshirts earlier. They've used our APIs and they've connected them to WooCommerce. And WooCommerce is their e-store where they actually sell their items. And when someone fundraises above a certain amount, our APIs send a message to their install at WooCommerce, and it automatically triggers one of their sweatshirts to be sent from their shipping agents. And so it's all automatic. They don't have to pick up the phone and say, hey, someone bought a sweatshirt or someone fundraised enough money, here's their shipping address, go send that. I mean, that is an overhead burden as well. And so they invested into this sort of automation. Our APIs really allow for that kind of automation.
Hi, have you tested one-step versus two-step donation forms, and can you speak a little about that?
Yeah, we are in the process of doing a lot of conversion studies of our donation forms. I really love the idea of a multi-step donation form. I've seen them be successful, and I think it really depends on the environment where someone's coming from. So if they're coming from a place where they're filling out lots of fields, right, and then they get to a two-step donation form, it may seem too daunting that there are multiple steps. But next year, I bet I'll have a lot of information about multi-step. I think there's some interesting stuff that you can do with multi-step around staggering questions. So a lot around this routine, right? You don't want to overburden people with questions before they donate. You kind of want to get them through that process, but you still might want to capture that information. So maybe during the loading screen in between the donation and the thank you, that's where you prompt them to share how they share why they donated, or ask them questions like, how do you like to be communicated with? Things like that.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow, sorry.
So I have a question about, two questions really. Can Classy tell me, if I call my Classy rep and I said, hey, what's the average amount of time it takes for a person to make a donation on my Classy page? Is that information available?
We could find that out for you. Yeah, just hit up our account manager. We can find that out. Well, it depends on every org. It depends on how many questions you add. It depends on a lot of different things. So.
Yeah, for my specific. And then what's the timeline on when Classy will offer mobile wallet and ACH?
Yeah, I don't have a timeline right now for either of those. I can tell you that we're working on them. With software, it takes time. We prioritize and things move around. My team that's working on ACH and on mobile wallets was a team that's been working on Passport for international. I actually didn't mention Passport, but I think it all kind of fits into this with routine. We just announced Passport, which is an international platform. The idea being localizing donation pages for people everywhere in the world. So if they're coming from the UK to present those pages in Great British Pounds, I think that's all part of that routine, right? Not to detract from your question. I would say soon. I don't have an exact date for you though.
Hi, I was wondering, are there options or plans for the future to allow A/B testing where I could, have one donation form with, certain verbiage or different, parameters, and then the other one so I can actually see if one performs better, and then also on the same vein, perhaps being able to amend my verbiage and whatnot for mobile, so maybe making copy shorter versus desktop?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do a lot of that ourselves. We are building this checkout to be embeddable, to be customizable. And so with that, you absolutely could do something like that. It's not ready right away, but we're working on it. But eventually, that's exactly the kind of form we're hoping to build. I'd love to talk to you about that afterwards because we're really interested in it. So.
Can you talk a little bit about your opinion and the data behind optional versus required fields? I know we try to keep our forms as minimal as possible, but there's certain data points like phone number, for instance, where we probably don't need it right now, but in my head I'm like, well, what if we want to do an SMS campaign or invest in SMS in the future? That's good data to have.
Yep.
But I just wonder what the risk and reward is of whether keeping it as an optional form or minimizing it and doing a specific data capture if we do decide to do SMS in the future.
Well, the short answer is every form has its own effect on conversions, every field. So I can't speak specifically to whether or not you should have a phone number or not. In principle and in practice, less is more. But like I sort of mentioned before, it really depends on your organization and your order of operations and what you want to do. I'm a firm believer in, if your donors want to participate in something like a text campaign, that they'll be willing to give you your phone number at a later date. So turn that into a conversation as well. Do you want to communicate with us via text? And if the answer is yes, then do it, right? Versus being overly cautious and collecting it and never using it, right?
So along the same lines, should we be limiting the amount of campaigns that we have that give the option to give like an honor memorial gift? Do you think that kind of detracts from the page, I guess?
Yeah, that's an interesting question too. So in case you didn't hear it, the question was about limiting campaigns that allow giving in honor of or in memoriam of somebody. That's actually a really interesting one because we've seen it both increase conversion in some capacities and decrease in others. And that is about the conversation, 100%. It's about whether or not someone is coming to that page for that purpose, in which case they want to see it, right? And so what we've seen work really well is people that create entire campaigns around it. I'm giving in honor of my grandmother who passed away, so I created a fundraising page, and really making that a prevalent piece of the donation form. On the flip side, your general donation form, people might come to that expecting to do that, so you might want to have that there. But maybe it's a general campaign, you might not want to have that there. We do hide that functionality via checkbox, so it's as small as possible on our checkout for that reason. Meaning if someone wants to give an honor, they check that box and it really expands it versus having all of that there at first and scaring the donor away. It's a good question.
What are the different ways you're seeing organizations test their checkout pages? So when you say that may work or it may not for your org, what process are people going through to run those A/B tests?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I've actually seen orgs create multiple campaigns with this for the same campaign. Our annual giving fund has 3 different versions with different text, and they break up their email lists and they send those different people those different lists, and they see what does better. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is building out forms on your own websites. In terms of Classy, that the first option is probably the best way to do it. Yep. Oh, 1 second, I'll get to you.
Hi, so I just had a quick question. You mentioned earlier something about embedding pages.
Yep.
Is that something Classy is looking into? Like if we can take our Classy donation page but embed it into our own website?
That's the goal. It's not available right now. We're thinking about it. We're working on it. We're trying to come up with the best solution. But yeah, we want Classy to be a total part of your fundraising efforts online, and that includes your website. Trying to make that easy.
And we have time for one or two
one
more
more
questions.
right there.
I implement Salesforce for nonprofit organizations. I've implemented Classy several times. Any thoughts on, once they get their initial donation page built, sort of changing it up in terms of like the color of the buttons and the pictures, or do you kind of recommend having the same page for an extended period of time?
I think it's honestly about conversation. It's what's the conversation and the story you're trying to tell at that moment. I personally believe in lots of donation pages. I think organizations have enough stories to tell that every donation page can be a different part of that story. So personally, I would say get creative, use your creative juices and go after it. But I do understand that for some organizations, they just want a general donation page that stays static and is familiar. So
no difference in, if they send out an email with a link to a donation page, that email can be linked to a different campaign and look and feel sort of completely different.
Yeah. I'm a fan of campaigns that are end-to-end the same. So if the ask is, this week we're digging a well in this town, I want the donation page to follow that same storyline versus just having a general donation page. So I think that's a narrative that can be consistent with the Classy pages. You can sort of stretch those conversations through the headlines and text fields on campaign pages, donation forms, and even the checkout receipts and the thank you page. And so in my opinion, that's the best kind of storytelling because it connects that reward piece right back to the donor. They know what they're being a part of. Thank you. I think we have time for like one more.
Hi, I'm just wondering, you talk about like the monthly donors.
Yeah.
Do you recommend maybe building a separate page for monthly donors, or is there any strategy that you think might work in terms of helping the growth for monthly donors?
Yeah. Question is around building your monthly donor network, and is it better to create campaigns that are monthly donor only or having pages that allow for both? And sort of the same vein that I answered, it's really about the conversation. I've seen a really successful monthly donor campaigns where the conversation is, by becoming a monthly donor, this is what we are doing together. Membership, if you will, into this organization, this reward, right? And they foster that relationship. And so there's tons of value in limiting those pages to just be monthly as an option. You can even on Classy fix the amount. So you can say, our top tier reward members are $100 a month and above. And so you can make sure they can only give $100 to join that, elite group of people. And so I've seen that be really successful. I wouldn't limit between one time and monthly on other pages because I think monthly donations are super important. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. Great. Thank you all so much. For next hour or so, I'm going to be hanging out in the Classy Lounge. If you want to talk about payment methods, you want to talk about donation pages, Passport, the new internationalization program, or even joining our early access, please let me know. Also, if you'd like a demo of the Classy fundraising page, our services, please head over to the Classy Lounge. There are people ready to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much.